Super excited to have you back here with another Career Hacks and Snacks. I have the wonderful Alex Lahmeyer, who is a fractional DEI leader and a career coach, similar to me, but focused very much on the LGBTQ plus community. Thank you for coming to the show and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Kate. So as you mentioned, I'm a fractional DEI leader, which means that I work in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And my role is to essentially work with organizations to help them integrate principles of this work into everything that they do. And as a fractional leader, it just means that I am working alongside them as you would maybe like a full-time person, but a fraction of the time. So being a little bit more embedded. And as far as my career coaching practice goes, I know we're kind of on the same wavelength there. But yeah, my primary focus is with the LGBTQ plus community. I am queer, non-binary, and so I really love working with my community.
I'm super excited to talk to you about this today because I feel like this is a hot button topic, although I don't feel like it needs to be quite as much of a hot button topic. To me, it feels like it should just be something sort of seamlessly integrated into what we do. What kind of work do you actually do? When you say you're a DEI leader, what does that actually mean? Because I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions about what this work is that people are doing.
So I've been in the consulting space for the last 4 or 5 years now. Prior to that, I was an in-house leader with a tech company. And a lot of what I do is going into an organization and spending some time getting to know them. Maybe they have a particular challenge or issue that they're aware of, but they're trying to understand maybe what is kind of at the heart of it, what is the root of it, being able to help them understand, okay, here's what I'm seeing is going on. Here are some of the opportunities that we have to maybe foster more inclusive behaviors in your culture. Maybe it's how do we make your processes more structured or more objective, more inclusive, more equitable. Some of it could be stepping into an organization to help them. Some of like the really unsexy, like operational work, which is actually my favorite stuff. I love doing systems work. I'm very much like a systems kind of person.
I am happy to send that right over in your direction, friend. Yes.
So, I mean, but some of it is like when I go into an organization, it's my goal is to help them build something that is a sustainable practice. So rather than going in and saying, oh, we're going to do these one or two unconscious bias trainings, or, let's plan a few like celebratory moments, or maybe some kind of sporadic programming. My goal is to help them think through, like, you have like probably a wealth of people data, whether it's demographic data that you collect, whether it's information you get from surveys. Help them use this strategically to figure out where might there be gaps in employee experience, in candidate experience. Talk about things like governance, like how do you actually run this work? How do you actually do this work and make sure that it gets done? How do you hold people accountable? How do you make sure that this work continues going rather than sort of dropping it on one person or hoping that a consultant like me kind of swings in and saves the day and then leaves? Just not how consulting works.
That's a whole nother day's worth of topic, not to use consultants. When you're in a company and when you're doing this kind of consulting work, is it generally that you're there because somebody has identified that there's a problem, or are you having to do a lot of educating about like where the problems could happen, like auditing, that type of thing? When someone reaches out to you and says, hey, I need some support, and maybe not, maybe you're just really amazing at biz dev and you're cold outreaching and people are like, yeah, I totally need that. But tell me about like when they reach out to you, what are they asking for?
There is some sort of signal that maybe something's not going as expected. And this could come out a lot of different ways. I think the companies who are maybe more reactive or maybe don't have as sort of strong of a grasp on kind of what the work is, maybe they are feeling a lot of complaints. Maybe they have employees who are just angry, probably understandably so. Something's probably not going well.
Like a valid reason to get some help.
Exactly. So there might be some moments where like, oh, hold on, something's not right here. And it's very obvious, but we're kind of nervous, we're anxious, we're not really sure what to do. We know we need some outside help. Other times, some people are maybe taking more of a proactive approach, maybe a more strategic approach. So they're like, hey, we just ran our biannual employee engagement survey, and we're seeing some themes in the comments, or we know that we've been getting feedback that we need to do a little bit more of this, but we're not really sure how to go about it because we don't feel like we have the expertise or the time. Even going back to like a sales process, sometimes an organization will think they know what they need. Often people reach for things like trainings as like solution number one. We have a bunch of new managers and we need to train them on unconscious bias. And I'm like, right. Okay, that could be helpful. And then as I ask them more questions and I kind of unearth like what's going on here, I find out that maybe there's another root cause that we haven't touched yet. Like I'll give an example. One time I spoke with an organization who did approach me for an unconscious bias training. I was like, okay, I would love to hear more because I'm not really one to like kind of do a one-off training like that in particular. As we were talking more, I was like, I learned that they actually had some issues with attrition. Like they had a pretty high attrition rate. And it turned out that their engagement survey was showing some pretty clear like opportunities, and they were not following through and actually making some of the improvements in these like focus areas in their engagement survey. People were leaving because they didn't feel like they were seeing any progress. And I was like, I actually think we need to first how you do your analysis of like your engagement survey, and then how you think about action planning. So you're being really strategic about making sure that, if people have disparate experiences in your organization, if you have maybe like trans and non-binary people are not having the same experiences as gender people, like we need to be like really measured about that. Unconscious bias workshops are not going to fix that.
And like, it's interesting what you can identify from an engagement survey too. But one of the things you touched on too was like that sort of disparate experience. But also I would say engagement surveys can be dangerous if you're not going to do anything about them, right? Like that's a huge piece of it that I feel like people miss. We worked with a couple of different groups when I was at Allbirds. We had a really big push for building out a DEI program and really kind of understanding what it meant. And then we worked with some really awesome people as a part of that process. We were all like, yes, engagement survey. Let's get this engagement survey going. And I just still remember distinctly people cautioning us to go, if you're not going to make the changes in your engagement survey, this is almost more damaging to bring all the things to the surface. And it just has always stuck with me that like, if you're not going to take action on something, don't ask people for their opinion and what they're looking for and what's going on. But usually you can tie attrition to that too, because I've seen that in multiple companies where, you can tie attrition to what your engagement survey is telling you and the experience of different people, because like your attrition numbers are going to tell you who's leaving. Is it women? Is it trans and non-binary people? Is it people of color? It's usually pretty clear who's leaving. Generally, if you're a good HR person, you probably have a good idea somewhere in your head or in your gut of why. Someone in sort of a DEI leadership type of role coming in and really being like a fresh set of eyes, not being attached to your organization too, right? Because you get really attached to your people, you get really attached to your leadership and who you are, and you kind of can't see the forest through the trees. And I think there's an element of bringing a new person in that really kind of helps you see your organization for what it is without having any sort of emotional attachment to it too. Have you had that experience too as a consultant, that it's like really easier to do it that way?
I was just thinking about this last night about like, one of the, I've worked in-house, I've worked with DEI firms, and I've also doing my own thing as well. So I've kind of looked at this work from like a few different angles now. I've also like done it when it was not my full-time job, when I was working in recruiting. So one of the things that I like, especially about operating fractionally, is that I kind of get to have my cake and eat it too a little bit. I get to be more collaborative. Like fractional engagements by design are more fluid and more sort of responsive to like what's happening. We're not like on a set track and we have to hit all these very specific milestones by specific dates. I've done that kind of consulting work. It can work really well, but especially in times like right now, we're filming this in early 2025, which is a lot of people are kind of feeling a lot of uncertainty about what the future of this work is. And so not being super rigid in the approach. And with kind of this like highly collaborative model, I also don't work in the organization. And so I can have some distance from some of the organizational politics. I need to be aware of them. I need to be able to name them and like help them work through them. Because one of the downsides that I remember feeling in-house, trying to affect change, like structural change in the organization and the culture. I worked for a company that had several hundred employees, and this is the same employer that's also cutting your paycheck.
Your promotions, whether you're moving forward in your career. Yeah, there's a huge attachment there.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I've appreciated about like being able to come in as a consultant, because I think you talked about you don't do anything with that data. If you ask for people's feedback, if you ask them to show up to interviews or focus groups and all these things, and then nothing happens, trust is gone. And trust is so hard to repair. I was just talking to a couple of friends about this last night. One of my friends was sharing like pretty messy issues that are going on in their workplace that they're having to deal with. And it was a complete breakdown of trust that was kind of at the heart of it because of some poor decision making. Yeah. And something I found is that I'll come in and I'll meet with some employees who might be more guarded, maybe more frustrated, maybe less willing to talk to someone who's internal, but then they'll actually be much more upfront with me. And so they'll be really honest with me. I can take that information, I can anonymize it, I can synthesize it with all the other conversations I'm hearing. And then I can take that real feedback back to a leadership team and say, hey, here's what your team is saying. I put it in like quotes before. Be like, here's the stories that I'm hearing, here's the stories I'm seeing unfolding. if that trust is gone in an organization, especially if maybe the team has tried to get this feedback and people are like, nope, not going to give it to you because you haven't done anything with it in the past. Bringing in a consultant can be really helpful there because
yes.
even though it might be a stranger, people do actually trust.
That's an interesting little side tangent too of those of us that are good at sort of like the HR coaching, we'll call it employee relations, whatever you want to call it, counseling. It's crazy how quickly you can get into an organization and build trust when you are an outsider. I was trying to figure out, right, egocentrically, like, oh, is it me? Am I just great at building trust? And really, that's probably not the only thing here. Part of it, like, I think people trust me because I tend to be an honest person. I am who I say I am, and I say the things that other people aren't willing to say. So, like, they hear truth there. Also, part of it is people are so hungry to have someone to talk to and someone to talk to that isn't necessarily politically interested in their organization and or responsible for their job. But I do think that there is something to be said for an external force coming in and being able to build that trust. But I also would say being a manager, being a person in an organization that is working within the framework of an organization in-house, building trust is a thing that everybody skips over. Nothing else can happen. Like, for example, I was running trainings recently for one-on-ones, like how to have a one-on-one. And I remember like running through the outline of what I was going to talk to with somebody and them saying, well, why are we spending so much time on this like early stage of this conversation? I'm like, you mean the building trust section? Because ultimately the rest of this doesn't matter if you don't have this part. People want to get to the trust. They want to get to the conversation. They want to get to the meat of things very quickly. If we take a step back before you do anything, that's the thing that has to happen. I remember talking to people about whether engagement survey was actually anonymous or not. And I was like, you have to ask me if when I say the survey is anonymous, whether it really is or not. I've already lost. That shows you what's going on in an organization more than anything else, is if that trust is missed. And to me, DEI is 100% about trust. I trust that you have positive intent. I trust that you want to build a great team. I trust that you understand my skills and capabilities, regardless of whatever you see externally. I think there's so much of that that's kind of missed. Does that resonate with you?
It does. I mean, again, I'm thinking back to like my sort of in-house days where, your clients are also like sitting at the desk next to you if you're like in an office, which is, kind of an interesting dynamic. My role was to like help sort of serve the organization in this capacity, but I'm also really trying to center the needs and experiences of all of our employees with a particular focus on like our historically marginalized. And I can't tell you how many times people would come to me, pull me into a conference room, come over to my desk and whisper something to me because they wouldn't share it with their manager, they wouldn't share it with HR, they wouldn't share it with their skip level, but they would share it with me. And I obviously can't be the keeper of all this information. And the same as the consultant, people do trust me, which I take that very seriously, but I also can't keep it. And so I have to figure out like, how do I make sure that we have some productive conversations here and try to work on repairing this trust? A lot of it comes down to like accountability. Going back to again, like, did you do what you said you were going to do? Because if you're holding yourself accountable, people see you modeling that accountability, especially if you're in a really highly visible or highly influential position, whether you're in the C-suite or just someone who's been around a while in the team or like really well respected. So otherwise, in the absence of that, this is what happens. You have people sort of whispering and kind of sharing this stuff, and it's not actually helping us try to figure out how do we address this. But I don't blame people at all for sort of defaulting to that because they're like, I don't know who else to talk to here.
Yeah, and you mentioned something here too. The absence of information is like you're inviting people to create a story because you haven't given them information. You haven't told them what's going on, which I think is a really interesting piece of this too, because I think as HR people, when we sit in these sort of spaces and the people that you like either work with as a consultant or have been previously, because we've both been kind of in those scenarios where people are so hungry for information. And I think old school HR and this space was all about retaining information and holding back and gatekeeping. And I think new HR is really trying to figure out where the balance is, or people ops, or whatever you want to call it. People is trying to figure out the balance of like sharing and not sharing. And I've found personally that like the best way to build trust is to tell people you can't talk about something instead of just not talking about it, right? Like being honest about what you can and can't say, being honest about what you are able and not able to share, being honest about how long it's taking you to handle an engagement survey. That like, yes, your feedback matters, but we're in a situation where we don't have enough staff to manage this process right now, right? Or I can't talk to you about like what's coming next for the organization, but I promise the second that I can, I will. So I'm a big fan of like naming the thing, whether you can do it or not, because I feel like that builds trust with people. And I think people miss that. They get real like insular and like, no, hold it tight to the vest. We can't tell anyone. But we can also just tell people that we can't tell them things too. And it makes it seem like there's not just like a bunch of stuff out there that they don't even know the ambiguous what that they're building stories about. Instead, it's like, hey, we have some things going on. Can't talk about them right now, but we're working on it. We're trying to get to a place where we can. That's kind of my take on that piece. I want to jump into one other thing with you really quick. I want to talk about like how pissed off I am that companies are abandoning their DEI initiatives, and that when you say you're abandoning your DEI issues, what kind of psychological damage that does to your organization. Because even if you don't have clearly defined, delineated goals, things, pieces, etc., feels like they're just saying we're abandoning you, like altogether in this like broad sweeping generalization. That doesn't have to happen also just because you removed some DEI initiatives. People still have agency inside companies that are these leaders and these people to continue this work regardless of whether there's structure around it. So one, are you as pissed off as I am about it? Because I'm like, we did all this work to get to this space and backsliding really makes me mad. And two, who do you think's responsible for like kind of carrying this work forward?
Yes, I'm pissed off. Even if it might
Good.
not be reflected
Really
in
like pissed off about it? Because I'm ready to be like angry. Anyway, sorry, go on.
Maybe it's just like having been doing this a while and kind of getting used to the sort of like the situation that we're in today. Like this isn't new. We're talking about this in the context of the US and what's happening in the US right now and its relationship with diversity, equity, inclusion work. And the root of a lot of this work goes back to the civil rights movement. A lot of modern day DEI work has been around for decades. I would say the current iteration that we're seeing and the strategies that people are employing, certainly more recent. So in terms of like our journey, we're still like, it's been a while, like we've been doing this for a while, but the pendulum continues to swing back and forth over time. Right now, it is swinging in a direction that I don't like, and I don't think a lot of other people like. You made me think of this when you're talking about like just being honest. You're operating from a place of reactivity or fear, and so you're afraid of being canceled, whatever that means to the individual at this point. You're afraid of being called out. You're afraid of looking like you don't know what you're doing because you want to exude confidence. Right now, we're seeing a lot of reactivity from some like pretty high-profile like organizations. I also say that like the media doesn't always represent the kind of work that's happening because you have to think about what's going to make the news, like a household name canceling their DEI programs or like a company that's just trucking along and doing a good job. And like, however, it doesn't mean that we're not backsliding in some ways. Who's responsible for this work? Everyone.
Not HR.
Correct.
Not HR. HR is not solely responsible for DEI, period, the end.
Okay. Exactly.
Sorry.
I'd also argue that even practitioners like myself, we are not solely responsible. We are here to make sure that we help people understand how to do this work and how to move this forward and to make sure that it continues to move forward. One of the, I think, failures in the way that like especially corporate America has approached this in recent years, when we look at like the rise of directors of DEI and chief diversity officers, is we'll create sort of one figurehead position. They will be under-resourced, undervalued, and kind of set up for failure in a lot of these cases. They don't have the same team. They're not given the same decision-making authority or influence. Other people are resistant to even them trying to affect change. And so we have this idea of like, oh, if we bring in this like a CVO or something, that this person's gonna come and fix everything. Again, my favorite word here, accountability then shifts. Accountability all gets dropped on one person.
Yes.
Rather than, and every leader thinking about, okay, what is my unique responsibility as a leader of the organization? How do I make sure that I am appropriately setting the vision for what this work is? How do I model this behavior? How do I hold the senior leaders in my department accountable for doing this work and making sure that they're also keeping on track? Because I can't be in all of these conversations as well. But then in the individual too, like even if you don't have decision-making power or influence, or maybe you're earlier in your career, or you feel like you don't know everything yet, like you don't need to be an expert to be contributing to this work and to be modeling behavior that is inclusive, to uphold fair workplace practices, like I think table stakes for having a good organization and a good culture and a good business. I really want people to start to think about, how do I integrate this into my job? How is this just part of
Yes.
my job?
We almost went too far in the other direction to make this like a single person, but there's a blame shifting almost that happens when you put it all in the hands of one person and then you don't provide them with resources. But also from the top, you're just like, oh yeah, talk to that person about it. Even if your company is abandoning these like sort of structured situations where like you've got a person responsible for this in your organization, or you can still do it yourself and model these behaviors to your point. I have another question here. Like, whose responsibility is this? Do you have any feelings about like employee resource groups and what that looks like from distributing the work of this work out?
So just for context, so when I was in-house, I also served as our ERG program manager. I also used to be an ERG leader, so I've also been in that seat years ago. I had the privilege of working with dozens of different ERG leaders across all different identity groups. A lot of what drives people to take on these leadership positions is passion. People are passionate about a specific cause. Maybe there's something in their professional history or their personal lives that has inspired them to take on this role. Maybe they want professional development as well. One of the things that keeps me up at night is like how organizations are maybe intentionally or unintentionally exploiting ERG leaders. When I reflect on some of my own behaviors and I look at some of the asks that I've made of ERG leaders to contribute to DEI strategy, I'm like, was there a better approach I could have taken where maybe like, am I asking too much of them? Your question about like compensation, I think is really important. So I'm a big fan of like finding a model to compensate ERG leaders in some way, shape, or form. And compensation can take different shape too. Compensation doesn't necessarily have to be like a spot bonus, like at the end of the year. I will say a quick plug for Culture Amp. They actually have a post on their blog about how to compensate your ERG leaders, and they kind of walk through how they've developed theirs. There's not a lot of information out there about how people do this because most companies don't. I think that's a great resource.
I love Culture Amp, love them. Yep.
Yeah, some other ways to think about compensation, because when I was in that ERG program management standpoint, I was very limited in terms of just budget. And so one of the things that I made sure to do was two things in lieu of having that compensation structure. And I think this can work well for smaller organizations or organizations with fewer resources, is to look at time allocation, being able to have whoever's overseeing the ERG program or ERGs work with the ERG leaders as well as their managers to like make an agreement, say, hey, this person is going to be dedicating X number of hours per month to this work as part of their job because they're contributing to organizational success. The other thing that I'm also passionate about is if you do performance reviews, whether they're 360s or something informal, or maybe something that is more formal where you're incorporating peer reviews, making sure that ERG leaders' contributions are captured in their performance reviews because performance reviews often feed into promotion and compensation decisions. If you're not recognizing ERG leaders for their contributions to the organization, what incentive does someone have? Why would they contribute to do it? Like you can't assume that people will just show up and do extra work for free. So looking at ways in which you can recognize and compensate ERG leaders, and also other ways, offering professional development programs, learning stipends, those kinds of things. So other incentives to help people do that. But to your point about distributing the work, like I don't want ERGs to be the core of your strategy. ERGs should exist for the benefit of the people in them.
One of the things that came up in my head when you were talking about performance reviews, the weight that you put behind something by putting it into somebody's performance review starts to codify this work as something that is work rather than it being just emotional, connection and floaty ether kind of work. Instead, it has a solid weight behind it that we are saying, like, this is something you're being. I never really thought about it that way. So I think that was a really good point, though, of putting it into like performance reviews to like actually make it something that's part of your growth and development too. So this work is not just one person's job. It is not just a edict coming down from above, like that says we do DEI now. It's not just an individual in an organization. It's not just a consultant coming in, but ultimately this work doesn't have to stop just because someone said it had to stop. I love your perspective. I love the work that you're doing. I love that you're doing coaching as well. But let's talk about what fuels your journey. This is our awkward shift into snacks. Here we go. Let's talk about snacks now. Tell me about your snacking habits and what did you bring with you?
Slightly intimidated because I remember when I was invited, you were like, prepare to defend your snack choice.
Oh, I'm just really judgmental about people's snacks.
Okay, so I got a sweet and a savory snack. Okay, so the first one, I actually had to go out of my way to find these. So we have Dap Voodoo Chips.
Daps! chips?
So they're kettle style chips, which I think are just like the ultimate potato chip. And for anyone who's like never had voodoo chips, like barbecue chips and salt and vinegar chips, had a child and then like it like got into your spice cabinet, like I feel like that's what voodoo chips are. There's just
I
like
have never heard of that before.
that's
I'm
my
going
own
to show
personal
up at your
description.
house and come get some of those. Where do you get those from?
And here in California, I had to go to Safeway because my local Whole Foods probably banned some of the ingredients in them. My local sandwich shop has some little bags of them. Zaps are great because it's just a punch of like sweet, savory, tangy, crunchy. You get all the sensory like experiences.
Yum. That sounds so good.
Yeah.
Are they like burn your mouth spicy? No. So it's just like flavorful and delicious.
So they do have a voodoo heat, which is like the spicy version. But actually, completely agree with you with kettle chips. Of like, if I have like a party, I don't know if people like this or hate this if I do this, but I will mix barbecue, salt and vinegar, and jalapeno chips and throw them all in a bowl.
I've never done it with the jalapeno chips. That's such a great idea. Okay, are you one of those people that's like charcuterie boards are your life because like it has 72 different options and you like having a lot of options?
Yes.
I'm Mixing
so
food is a controversial thing though. People hate that. So tell me what's your other snack?
so
Which
we've
ones?
got peanut butter M&Ms.
Yes.
From what I understand, peanut M&Ms seem to be the general consensus of like the optimal one. I just like chocolate and peanut butter. You don't get like the crunchiness of like the peanut M&M. I feel like when I was thinking about like what snacks would I pick, I was like, these are two of the snacks that you have to rip it out of my hands or the bag will be empty.
It's not like a
No.
sharing unless somebody like you really like somebody next to you at the movie theater. Maybe you'd share like one or two, but only if they ask. Okay, so peanut butter versus peanut. I think this is a really interesting distinction because I feel like I love your snacks, by the way, and I'm gonna go find those Zapp's potato chips. Okay, last question for you. Food aversions. Tell me about your childhood traumas. Tell me about the thing you can't put in your mouth and actually like get down because it makes you gag. Tell me.
Oh boy. My like taste buds have changed a lot over the years. So I grew up an extremely picky eater. I mostly ate frozen food, processed food, fast food, like just would eat anything. As an adult, I'm like super passionate about food and cooking. And so like I'll eat most things. My taste buds have not come around to olives.
My husband can't eat olives. He can't tolerate them at all. There have been at least two other people on Career Hacks and Snacks who have said olives are disgusting. So is it all olives in general? Or are you going to be one of those, oh, I can eat the black olives, but the other ones are gross? Tell me why.
It's so frustrating because I will dip bread in olive oil. So like
Mhm.
clearly there's something about the flavor of olives that is fine. And I also love pickled food and brine food, fermented food, that kind of stuff.
Love
But
those
there's
things.
something about olives. There's something about like the flavor of it. I don't know if it's like there's some sort of weird funky sweetness to olives. My palate's like, no, not today or
Not for
tomorrow.
me. It is interesting the things that like there's a lot of people that just have specific aversions to. And you know what else is interesting? How many people have brought peanut butter type things as their favorite snack? There's such a theme of like people love peanut butter in their snacking, which is like we should all do a psychological experiment about that. And that people generally have these like weird food aversions to things and they tend to be grouped in like there are tastes that seem to be like really kind of common between people. I'm not trying to act like this is a really important, like deep discussion about like snacks. All right. Well, thank you for bringing your snacks. Thank you for bringing your amazing perspective on DEI. And, you know, just I love this conversation, not because it's a fun conversation, but just because it's a conversation we should all be having everywhere right now and figuring out the right way to kind of move forward and keep this going. Self-promotion time. Tell us about you. What can we expect from you going forward?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me again. I've loved this conversation. I think anyone who talks to me for more than like 2 minutes realizes that I could talk indefinitely about this topic and something I'm passionate about. For folks who like to work with me, I work as a fractional DEI leader and as an advisor. So, you know, depending on the level of support you need, I'm happy to jump in and partner with your leadership team, with your organization to help you think about how do you integrate DEI in a really meaningful and sustainable way into how you operate as an organization. I also, going into this year, am also going to be doubling down on my facilitation work. So working with organizations to help develop the skills and tools that they need to be able to do this work effectively, to be able to work together, things like collaboration and feedback. So I'll be adding workshops to my repertoire soon. I think they will be live by the time this episode is out in the wild.
That'll be
Which is
exciting. It's a great opportunity to like share with the organizations I'm working with and, you know, other fractional leaders too that don't necessarily do this type of work. It's a great add-on to the type of fractional work that we do in like the HR and recruiting recruiting space as well. So I love that. And then where can we find you?
If you want to be like super like casual, LinkedIn is actually perfectly fine. Feel free to just like send me a connection request and like DM me and be like I heard you chatting, would love to learn more about the work that you're doing. You can also go to my website, which is www.boundlessarc.com. That's the name of my business, Boundless Arc. Don't be fooled, I am a one-person show.
Well, awesome. I would love to have you back as soon as we figure out what this show actually is. This was such a delightful experience. Thank you everyone so much for coming to Career Hacks and Snacks. And please reach out to Alex whenever you have a chance if you're interested in connecting. And we'll see you for the next episode. Thanks so much.